Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about the fact that we need both big exercises and small exercises, compounds and isolations, if we actually want to be truly big and jacked. And again, a lot of people will argue this stuff, and it's amazing how many people will throw away tradition, throw away what has worked for generations, both in the real world, later in the lab, and it blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind that people still argue against this because, and no one is saying you can't gain muscle with just one or the other. You can. But there's a few things to think about, guys. When you look at how the old school bodybuilders trained before they had access to all the drugs, right? Before they had access to all the drugs, what did you see? It was always big compounds followed by isolation work, right? Heavy work followed by pump work. And it worked. It worked. Lots of protein, lots of food, and they got big. They got jacked. They had good physiques. It worked. It worked for generations. You go back and look at the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. They all trained this way. Okay? How'd they build big chests and triceps? Well, they did bench pressing. They did incline pressing. Then they do dumbbells. They do flies. They do extensions. They do dips, right? But they would do the small stuff too. How'd those guys get big lats and big arms? Well, they would do pull-ups and chin-ups, but then they would do curls. They do curls with barbells. They do curls with dumbbells, right? They would work different angles. They worked different angles. Big work followed by small work. Over and over and over and over. It had worked forever. And when people deviated from it, they didn't get as good of results. I'm not saying people didn't try. What people need to understand, people figured out in gyms back then what worked because they're like, man, the guys who get bigger faster, this is what they do. And the guys who do something else, they don't get as big as quick. They have lagging muscles more easily. They're not getting the same results. And they didn't have tons of guys on lots of drugs to change it. In other words, since people weren't really able to get around bad training by just upping the dose, bro, you couldn't use that. So today we see that. We see people who get pretty good results doing horrific methods or other methods because of the drugs, and they can use plenty of them and they get results, particularly if they've got good genetics. So we see that today. They didn't have that back then. So it was kind of a self-selecting process. People figured out what worked pretty effectively. And that's what we saw. That's what we saw. And it worked. Then we move forward to the lab today. What do we find? Most studies, doing a big compound followed by an isolation builds more muscle than doing just the compound or the isolation. It also builds more muscle than doing the isolation than the compound. People want to try to do that silly stuff. That has never worked for people not on a bunch of drugs. The only people who ever used the pre-exhaustion type idea successfully were on large doses of drugs. In the lab, it has never been successful. It has always produced less muscle growth. In the real world, before guys were using gear, it produced less muscle growth. They figured that out really fast. Like, you don't want to do curls before you do rows or pull-ups. It doesn't work too well. You end up gaining less total muscle. And that's again, what we found in the lab. And I mean, again, the example, take the triceps. Okay? Take the triceps. When a tricep extension, a laying extension, was compared with bench press, what did they find? They found this well over a decade ago. What happened? Well, the tricep lateral head grew the most from the bench, right? Fair enough. The tricep long head, the longer head, grew from the isolation movement better. Lo and behold, when they did both, the whole tricep grew more than if you did just one or the other. This was consistent. Wow, it's almost like some of the compounds and some of the isolations bias different parts of the muscle a little bit. Again, making the case for both. The big compounds build your overall size. They're going to put the overall mass on you efficiently. Then isolation work will fill in the gaps and it will fill in the weak links, right? That's the idea. It says work forever. It works in the lab. Same thing for hitting a few different angles. And this is why two people are like, well, I mean, how is the bicep going to be more recruited than with a chin-up? Well, glad you asked that. Bodybuilders figured out a long time ago if they do multiple angles, they gain more muscle. Well, what do you think's been found in a few studies that looked at it? The same sort of stuff has been found that showed these bodybuilders are right. And I'm not saying modern exercise science and hypertrophy is the be-all end-all, because the studies are pretty bad. But when the studies consistently match what the anecdote's been showing for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, I think we're onto something. Okay? Just saying, if you go back 60 or 70 years and it worked really well in the real world before all the drugs, then the lab shows it works better, I think we're onto something. I think it might be a good strategy. At that point, I think it's fair to say that. Proved in the pre-drug era, then shown to be the case in the lab. That's a win. You should consider doing whatever that was. In this case, multiple exercises. When it's been studied, if you do 10 or 12 sets with only one exercise in a given muscle, the muscle growth tends to be slightly less than if you split that volume up over 2 or 3 exercises. So yeah, one exercise is never going to give you 100%. And it makes sense because there's going to be certain muscle fibers, certain joint angles, certain heads that are not getting full activation out of that one movement pattern. So yes, even if you're doing heavy chins, and heavy chins can help with your biceps, no one's saying they can't, you should probably do some type of curl also. I'll go so far as to say, if you're like me and you have really struggled with biceps, you should probably do a couple different types of curls, maybe more than a couple. You might need several different types just to make sure that you work every part of the muscle. Same thing with the chest. Sure, bench press works great for the chest if you perform it correctly. Some people are like, no, it's not. No, it's wonderful. It's been repeatedly demonstrated too, if you know how to do a bench. But you know what? Your chest is going to be even better if you add some incline barbells or dumbbells. Might even be better still if you throw in some weighted dips or a cambered bar or some decline or some dumbbell presses, right? To get another deep stretch, working at a slightly different angle. Can go a long way, right? Same thing, you see me over here doing some pretty complicated bicep work. Why? The bicep has 3 functions. My biceps need more work. They're probably my worst muscle group. You know, there's a point where you look at that and go, you know, I should probably be doing several different things for that muscle if I want it to grow. And we need to progressively overload all of it. Progressively overload all of it. But yes, big compounds followed by isolation work is a time-proven method of getting jacked for someone who's drug-free. Okay? It's a time-proven method. Train them hard, train them correctly, pick good exercises, right? And you should be good to go. You'll get results. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.